Let's go with one of the OG fantasy characters and build Gandalf from Lord of the Rings in Dungeons & Dragons. And you may assume that I'm immediately going to go with just pure wizard on this, but trust me, it's going to be far, far different than that. And for anybody that wants to get into the nitty gritty and they're like, well, what about Gandalf the Grey versus Gandalf the White and all that? Don't worry, we'll get there. But first, we have to pick a race. And while Gandalf may look human, except for being a bit taller and a bit more focused on magic, he's actually part of a different race known outside of their actual names as the Holy Ones. So I was very, very tempted to go with an Aasimar. But the Aasimar abilities in no way really fit with most of what Gandalf can do. So we are actually going to go with a custom lineage because I couldn't, in good faith, go with a human. By choosing a custom lineage, we get very similar features to what we would get from being a human variant, but at least we don't have to say that we're human. We get proficiency in one skill, so we're going to go ahead and choose Arcana because you are a wizard, and you do get a proficiency from being a custom lineage, so we're going to grab Arcana because you are focused more on magic stuff. Then we're also getting a feat by choosing custom lineage. And you may assume that I'm going to choose Warcaster or Magic Initiate or something, but it's not going to be either of those, and I'm actually going to save it for level 2 of this build. But to not forget that you are more of a Holy One type of thing, we're going to go ahead and choose a background and go with Astral Drifter. The reason that we're going with Astral Drifter is this does give us the Magic Initiate feat, but it does force us to use Wisdom for that ability modifier, and we're also forced to choose the Cleric spell list for the spells that we choose. So in the Lord of the Rings, at least in the books, even though it doesn't show up much in the movies, Gandalf has some of his standard spells that you see all the time, but he does have actually a little bit of healing. So we're going to go ahead and choose the cantrip Light because he often uses that, but we're also definitely going to focus on grabbing Spare the Dying. This allows you to stabilize anybody that's in critical condition. And then we're also going to get one first level spell, so we're going to grab Cure Wounds. We needed some level of healing, even if it was a smaller point of his abilities. On top of all of that, this background does give us proficiencies in Insight and Religion. Then when it comes to some starting stats, I'm going to have a point spread that looks like this. You may notice that Wisdom is particularly low, despite the fact that Gandalf is known to be more of a wise wizard, but I can't help but focus on that basic puzzle that's thrown at him in Fellowship of the Ring. I mean, it's so obvious to basically anybody, and I really emphasize this idea with him having slightly lower wisdom, but overthinking it way too much with his super high intelligence. Then when it comes to a starting class, we're gonna dive into Wizard, but we're not gonna stay here very long. We'll grab proficiencies in History and Investigation because those very heavily rely on our intelligence. We get saving throws in Intelligence and Wisdom, and we get access to a Quarterstaff, which is something that we were gonna need. At first level of Wizard, you get Arcane Recovery, so you can recover a little bit of your spellcasting on a short rest, and you obviously get some spellcasting being a wizard. Gandalf is actually pretty known for being decent with fire, lightning, and light magic. We already have the light cantrip thanks to our background, so for now we're going to grab the cantrips Firebolt and Lightning Lure, and you can kind of move stuff with your mind, so we're also going to grab Mage Hand. Then we do need some defensive abilities because you are managing to stop the Balrog from smacking down on you over and over again, so we're going to grab Mage Armor and Shield. But you do also slam your staff down, blocking that Balrog and immediately destroying a lot of stuff around you. So we're also going to grab Thunder Wave. And then there is a very tiny thing in the books where he's able to disguise himself and kind of blend in a bit better. So we'll also grab the spell Disguise Self. This gives us most of what we need early on. And frankly, Gandalf doesn't do a ton of casting early on, especially in the movies. You pretty much never see him doing much actual magic except for in extreme situations. It's almost like he only took one level of wizard to start. So with that in mind, at level 2, we're going to do a multi-class, and we're going to jump into fighter. This gives us proficiency with all sorts of weapons, so now we can actually wield a longsword in our other hand, on top of having our quarterstaff in our main hand. And we're going to focus in on this because you also get a fighting style when you become a fighter, so we're going to grab 2-weapon fighting. But you may immediately be noting, hey, you can't really wield a longsword and a quarterstaff because neither of those are light. But we do have that feat from our custom lineage. So the feat we're going to grab is dual wielder. So now while you're dual wielding weapons, you have a +1 bonus to your armor class. You can use 2-weapon fighting even if the weapons aren't considered light, as long as they're not heavy, and you can draw and stow both of them at the same time. So now you can wield a staff in one hand and a longsword in the other and really start beating down on some goblins or urukai or whatever. And I feel like early on, Gandalf is actually more of a fighter than he is a wizard. And going further through the fighter stuff, at first level you get second wind, so you can heal yourself a little bit as a bonus action for an amount equal to 1d10 plus your fighter level, but you can only do this once per short or long rest. Then at second level of fighter you get action surge, so now you can take 2 actions in a single turn, but you can also only do this once per short or long rest, at least for now. Then at third level of fighter, you get a martial archetype, otherwise known as a subclass. And I was very tempted to go with Cavalier because you have a very iconic horse that you ride. But I do feel like I can't ignore the fact that you have some more spellcasting that we need to dive into. So we're going to go ahead and choose Eldritch Knight. This allows us to heavily mix wizard and fighter much more seamlessly. This gives us some more spell casting, but it's specifically from the wizard spell list, and you use intelligence for the casting, so either way it's going to focus on the same stats. You also get the feature weapon bond, so you cannot be disarmed of a weapon. So when you're fighting that Balrog and you fall deep into the depths but somehow you still manage to snag your sword on the way down, that's how you can pull that off. And at fourth level of fighter, you get an ability score improvement. And I cannot ignore the fact that you are dual wielding most of the time. So that does really limit your spellcasting ability, because if both your hands are occupied and if you need to do some fancy stuff with one of your hands, it's a little more difficult to manage because you'd have to stow one, cast, and then on your next turn, take it back out. And it's just a bit of a hassle. So instead of all that, we're going to take a feat and we're going to go with Warcaster. This gives us 3 great features. First, we have advantage on concentration checks because concentrating on a spell is kind of important. Second, whenever you have to do some sort of casting that involves your hands and your hands are occupied, you don't have to worry about it anymore. So if you have weapons or a shield equipped in both hands, you are totally fine. You can still do plenty of casting. And then the third feature is that if you get to make an opportunity attack against somebody, you can now do so with a single target spell. So now we have Warcaster, so we can do some casting even though we have things equipped in both of our hands, and we have plenty of spell casting, because also Eldritch Knight gives us more spell casting. And I almost forgot to mention that we get more spells with that. And while there's more spells I'm gonna cover in the character sheet, there's a few I really want to make sure I grab while I'm here. We'll grab Booming Blade just to hit somebody a little harder, and we'll also grab Thunderclap so you can smack your staff to the ground a little bit better, but we want to also grab a few first level spells. Gandalf is able to charm people to a decent degree, so we're going to grab Charm Person. We'll grab Expeditious Retreat, so you can say fly you fools and really mean it. And then there's actually a very notable occasion in the books where Gandalf shines a crazy light that blinds a bunch of goblins. So we're going to grab Color Spray, and this blinds a bunch of creatures in a 15-foot cone in front of you. Then at 5th level of fighter, you get extra attack. So now you can attack twice as your action and once as your bonus action with your staff if you're dual wielding the staff and sword combo. But don't forget, you got plenty of spell casting on top of it. But to make sure you can hit a little better, at 6th level, you get an ability score improvement. So we're going to go ahead and boost up our strength by 2 points because that's what we need at this point, pretty much evenly dividing our strength and intelligence. Then at 7th level of fighter, we get access to 2nd level spells as being an Eldritch Knight. So there's maybe a 2nd level spell that's focused more on fire that I might grab because he is pretty good with fire, but I also want to grab Pyrotechnics because you do show up to the Hobbits with tons of fireworks, and that seems to pretty much coincide with Pyrotechnics. Also at 7th level of being an Eldritch Knight, you get War Magic. So now you can use your action to cast a cantrip, and then you can still attack with a melee weapon as your bonus action. Then at 8th level of fighter, you get another ability score improvement. So we're going to go ahead and boost up our intelligence again, because that's where we want to start leaning more into our spell casting. Because as far as I'm concerned at this point, you've been so focused on being a fighter and kind of thrown your magic to the background, up until you go up into the mines of Moria and you come against a Balrog. You suddenly get this nice little idea in your head of, hey, tell the rest of the party to head on forward. I'm going to take this dude on alone because you have high intelligence and you know splitting experience points amongst an entire party really diminishes those returns. But if you can take down that Balrog by yourself, that's a lot of XP. And that's the truth of what happened. Gandalf was just an experience hog. So you take down that Balrog and you level up your magic, because we're going to jump back over to Wizard for our next level. Now you have fully upgraded to Gandalf the White, so we're going to go ahead and take our second level in Wizard, and that gives us a Wizard subclass, otherwise known as an Arcane Tradition. And there's one ability that we haven't really touched on yet, and that's Gandalf's ability to kind of have some level of premonitions about the future. And while he's good with most of his fire and lightning and whatever else, I need some way to get better premonitions. So we're going to take Divination for our subclass. This gives us Divination Savant, so now we can get some divination spells a little more easily, and it gives us the feature Portent. So whenever you finish a long rest, roll 2 d20s, and you get to save those rolls and use them at any point throughout your day. It can replace the roll on a d20 for you or anybody that you can see for any attack roll, ability check, or even a saving throw. So if you happen to roll really low on this ability, you can actually use that against your enemies to make sure they don't hit. Or you can wind up doing the opposite. If you roll really well, you can make sure that one of your allies crits or something. Overall, it's a very powerful ability to have in your back pocket, and it does tend to drive some dungeon masters insane as they get all excited because they crit, and then it's like, nope, no you didn't, never mind, didn't happen. Then at third level of Wizard, you get access to second level spells directly from being a wizard, so we can just grab a few fire and lightning based stuff. Then at fourth level of Wizard, you get another ability score improvement, so let's go ahead and increase our intelligence again. Then at fifth level of Wizard, you get access to third level spells, so we'll grab some of the most reliable fire and lightning spells with Fireball and Lightning Bolt. But we also have to remember that he does have the ability to counterspell, so we're going to grab that spell as well to counterspell your enemies. Then at 6th level of Wizard, you get another feature from being a Divination Wizard called Expert Divination. And this feature makes it so casting divination spells is actually not quite as costly. So if you cast a divination spell of 2nd level or higher, you then get to simultaneously regain a spell slot that you've already spent. Only caveat is that it has to be of 5th level or lower, and it has to be a lower level spell slot than you used for the divination spell. Then at 7th level of Wizard, you get a higher level spell casting again, but we're going to save most of those for the character sheet. Then at 8th level of Wizard, you get another ability score improvement. So let's go ahead and boost up our strength again, so you can hit a little better with both your staff and your sword. Then at 9th level of Wizard, you get access to 5th level spells, and I really wanted to make sure I got this level of spell casting. So now you have more ways to mentally control things, either by using the spell Big B's Hand or telekinesis. There's other spells we can use to amplify this effect, but those were the main two I wanted to make sure I made note of. Then at 10th level of Wizard, you get another feature from being a Divination Wizard. This feature is called the Third Eye. So when you take a short or long rest, you get to gain an effect, and you can change this effect every time you take another short or long rest. You get to choose from either Dark Vision, so you can see in the dark, Ethereal Sight, so you can see into the ethereal plane within 60 feet of you, which I imagine is like what happens when you put on the ring and you can see everything in that weird gloomy sense. Or you can get Greater Comprehension, so you can read all languages. And the final option is See Invisibility, so you can obviously see invisible things. Then at 11th level of Wizard, you get access to 6th level spells, and I wanted another light based spell that did more damage because Gandalf is known to have pretty solid light-based magic abilities. So I'm going to grab the spell Sunbeam. It allows you to just shine a bright light that just damages your enemies in a straight line, and you can continue to shine it and blind your enemies, damaging them at the same time, and just keep hanging on to it. It is a pretty powerful spell as long as you maintain concentration. There's also a pretty solid lightning based spell here with Chain Lightning, so I wouldn't want to forget that either. Then at 12th level of Wizard and 20th level overall, you get your final ability score improvement. So let's go ahead and boost up our Constitution by 2 points, because this helps our health and our concentration checks, and we don't have a lot of armor class, so the extra health is really going to help. That brings us to 20th level overall, which is the end of this build. However, there are a few downsides to this build, which are most notably that you are very, very squishy, you do not have a ton of armor class and you do not have a ton of health. So you want to be very careful, but you still have shield at your disposal. So at least you have that going for you, which is nice. I was very tempted to grab the spell clone, so that way you had a second life at your disposal, because there is this whole idea of being reborn as Gandalf the White. But I didn't want to dive that deep into the wizard spell list, so I thought this was a bit more fun. Make sure to subscribe if you like D&D related content, especially because it makes it so you roll more nat 20s than if you weren't subscribed. Let me know if there's any other builds or videos you want me to do in the future, because I really read a lot of those comments. And if you want access to the character sheet for this build or any of my other builds, especially with all of the spells I didn't mention here but are still on the character sheet for Gandalf especially, you can find all of that on my Patreon, linked in the description down below. Just like all of these people have access to, and I have some especially awesome patrons, which are my player character patrons. Alone, the Holy 999s, Christopher Sams, Dark of Skies, Barrow Skrull, Zach, Felix Ulick, The 10586, Barrelisk, Kevin Shirley, Zephyros, That Funny Man 57, Joshua Maynard, CGC 2014, Panda Milkshake, Ted Z, Andrew Nobles, Karkek Kitsune, Deckard Joint, Z13, Viral Nerevar, Daniel Gavin, and the Dino 21. Then there's the Dungeon Master level patrons that I actually play D&D with. Silas Uchiha 696, T Brownie, Julia B. De Oliveira, Just Wolf, Shane Gilroy, Daniel Saffler, Common ZX, Cyberciety, and Salvador. Then there's the contributor to an insane degree, my god tier level patron, GameSteak. So a very special thank you to him. And if you made it all the way to the end of this video, let me know by hitting that like button. And I'll be here helping you roll at least 3 nat 20s in your next D&D session, especially if you want to go as a classic and play as Gandalf the White or Gandalf the Grey in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition.